guys, I'm Miss Martin. I'm going to talk to you about the elements of Gothic literature and about how Poe uses these elements within his stories. We see elements of Gothic literature or Gothic literature in from other countries and slightly different than Poe, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Wuthering Heights, Frankenstein, those sort of books. But Poe's a little bit unique in his use of Gothic literature, and if you've ever read him, you know he's pretty unique anyway. Hopefully you've already watched the biography by now, so let's get started with these elements of Gothic lit. I encourage you to take notes in the back of your Poe book, and so if you flip around to the back of your book, you'll see that there are a couple of empty pages back there that are a great place for you to take notes so that you'll have them with you. Yeah, there are about 5 or 6 blank pages back here. So let's start with setting an atmosphere. And so the typical setting of Gothic literature. And so we're going to have old rundown structures. In a lot of Gothic stories, it is great castles or country manors. And we'll see that in some of Poe's stories, but they're not always castles or manors. If they are, they're going to have hidden passages, trapdoors, maybe some kind of dungeon. But the big thing to highlight here is what you're going to see in these settings is often a decline from former greatness, something that used to be really nice and has now decayed or declined or kind of crumbled in some way. Over on the other side of the screen, you'll see bleak, foreboding environments. Foreboding means that something bad is coming. And there may be dark forest or maybe a house surrounded by forest. Maybe there's going to be mountains, maybe a storm, and something far away from civilization. In most cases, again, not always. In one of the stories you'll see they're probably in a city, but it feels very isolated anyway. And then that atmosphere, mystery, horror, and dread. You know something bad is coming often in these stories. These are typically really scary, creepy, nightmare-inducing tales, which can be really fun sometimes. Let's talk about the protagonist, the main character in Gothic literature. They're usually isolated or alone. And add yourself a note here that can be literal isolation, meaning they live alone, or it may be that just that they feel isolated because they feel different than everybody else. And so maybe that's physical, like they're far away from people, they live somewhere really remote. And maybe it's emotional. They feel like they're different. Maybe they feel like they're going crazy or something like that. And this isolation may be self-imposed, meaning they're doing it to themselves and they're the cause of their own problem. Or maybe it's just the result of some circumstance beyond their control. That's the location of the family estate and other people have moved away, but somebody's got to take care of the estate, for example. And then the plot may involve hidden secrets or maybe some secret plot that threaten the protagonist. But you'll see in Poe's case, he sometimes twists this and we have a secret plot that the protagonist is hatching, or the main character anyway is hatching against someone else. And so make yourself a note of that. Emotions in Gothic literature. Emotions run high, meaning that people feel big emotions. Our characters may be passionate or strong-willed, and they may, the notes say, defying others or even their own common sense in pursuit of their goals. They may do things that are clearly nonsensical, that maybe we know are going to get them in trouble or that they shouldn't be participating in. If they're female characters, they tend to be sort of curious, they have a tendency to swoon, and you won't see female characters in all of the Poe stories, but they tend to be rather weak. And of course, that's not in all Gothic tales, but in these Poe stories, that's what we'll see when we see a female character, which is really going to be rare in these stories that I've given you. The male characters often have bad tempers because they have some sort of inner torment. But again, high emotion, heightened sense of drama. And so some examples of that are going to be murder, kidnapping, people going crazy, maybe a tragic illness. And so you're going to see really all of those things over the course of the stories that you're going to read. Next is, we already did that one. Moving on. The damsel in distress. Poe doesn't use the damsel in distress often, at least not in his most famous stories, but I want you to know about it because you will see it in one story. The damsel in distress, meaning a woman in need of rescuing, appears in a lot of Gothic literature, but again, not a whole lot in the Poe you're going to read. And these are women who are threatened by these powerful men who rule over them really cruelly, right? They're victims to some sort of man in their life who is not nice to them. If that's not the case, they may be scared of something, or they may have some kind of ailment, which means illness that makes them weak and in need of help. It makes them an easy target or victim. Next, let's go to foreboding. So I love this sentence here. Ominous implications precede dark events in Gothic literature. What it really means is that there's foreshadowing that bad things are coming. You can tell from early in the story, because it's signs or seeds planted within the story, that bad things are going to happen. We may see unlucky omens, like symbols of death. There may be some kind of ancient curse, or even just some kind of a person who feels like maybe they've got some kind of curse on them. And sometimes there may be dark forces, something that seems supernatural or something. Decay is a big deal in Gothic literature, especially in Poe. So our notes say the overall impression of a Gothic world is one of decay, a formerly great family, like a family that used to be really wealthy and prominent and powerful, with a really great reputation, that has somehow declined away from that, maybe through illness, or they've lost all their money, maybe a decayed community, even a country or individual who peaked sometime in the past, and they've begun to decline. And that can be mental, physical, or maybe even both at the same time. And you will see this in the landscape sometimes, like crumbling buildings, rotting trees, and in the characters themselves. So mental illness, physical illness, that kind of thing. The supernatural. So the supernatural appears a lot in Gothic literature, and so sometimes it's ghosts and unexplained manifestations. But really, typically with Poe, there's maybe the suggestion of the supernatural in some stories, like a ghost that has a logical explanation later. But often in Poe's story, the evil comes from the protagonist, the people, not from some outside demonic force, not from some ghost or haunting, but it's the people. And I think that's part of Poe's message often, is that human beings can be monsters. We don't need supernatural monsters. And so for this part, think about with each Poe story, is there some hint of the supernatural in the story? Something where someone who's superstitious might believe that it's supernatural. Things like that. Okay. So as you're reading these stories, you're going to be jotting down specific details from the stories that fit with these characteristics. And you may be able to skip over one or two of them. Like we said, damsel in distress is not something that's going to appear in every story. And so you may be able to skip over that. You will have to skip over that for some of the stories. But I want you to fill in every box that you can for each of these stories.